All right. So the stream is starting.
Okay.
Just give it a moment. Excellent. Excellent. All right. I see it coming through. So that's good. Let me open up the chat. All right, everything's connected. All right, so we are good. We are in the pre-show, the SwiftCake pre-show. So that's good. Sending data, sending data. All right. So everything's sending data. So we're happy. We're just waiting for people to come in and say hi.
Hi.
So Solomon, are you originally from Stuttgart?
Yes. Basically, whole life grew up there. Yeah, everything. Studied also computer science here. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
What type of development do you do? What languages do you work in?
Yeah. So I like programming in general. So thinking about algorithms independent of the language. But because of the university, the main language initially was Java.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a long time ago. It was the J2E framework.
Yep.
And design patterns, and you only had 2 tiers or 3 tiers. So that's how it started. And later JavaScript and came in addition to it when things shifted more towards front-end development, where a lot of JavaScript is used. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. All right. Sorry, I'm making sure all the streams are on. That's really important. All right. I think, all right, we are good across the board.
And the thing is, I mean, many people have much more software experience, but in these about 20 years, you could see how the number of software components has increased, how the dependency between components has increased, and yeah, it's a different way of developing software nowadays than maybe 15 years ago.
It absolutely is. I've been doing this for about 15 years, and I think back to when I got started. What was it like? Because I came out of college as a C++ developer, and then got myself thrown into a job doing C#, and then I've just been C#, JavaScript, all that good stuff my entire career. It's much easier that way.
Yeah.
I dabble in other things when I can, but my bread and butter is C#, .NET.
Yeah, that's like an entire ecosystem, a closed ecosystem, the whole .NET framework.
Right? Yeah. Yep. Well, now with the .NET Core, it's all open source. So it's all open source. It's all cross-platform. It's probably, if you had told me 10 years ago that .NET would be cross-platform, running the same code on Windows, Mac, and Linux, I would have said you're crazy, and that would be great, but that's never going to happen. And here we are today, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Is writing code on a Windows machine and deploying it to Linux servers. And it just works, and that's great.
Yeah. I wonder if that increased the number of software components that use this framework.
Alrighty. All right, so hello to the folks out there on the internet. We have a couple of folks watching from YouTube, a couple of folks out on Twitch. We're going live a little bit early today just for some pre-show chatter. And our topic today is going to be software version release forecasting. And so if you have any questions or any pre-talk questions about that, just go ahead and put them into the chat, and I'll relay them to Solomon as long as he wants me to. And yeah, we're looking good, solid on all of our platforms. Also, folks that are out there watching, if you're interested in coming on the show, we're looking for some future guests. Just go ahead and reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at the number 1 Kev Griff, KEVGRIFF. And say I'm looking at our schedule. We have a couple really big names coming up, and I would say who they are, but they're not quite finalized yet. So I need to wait until we get a little bit more commitment from people before I tell the entire world that they're coming online. All right. I'm going to shut down everything that uses CPU. I've done this a couple times where I accidentally leave a process running and it starts pegging my computer, and everything stops working.
Yeah.
My voice gets choppy. My video will be off when you talk, but it's not a good time. Let's see. All right, bandwidth is good. All right, I am really happy with this setup. I think this is what we're going to continue going forward, because this just works. And if it works, you can just go with it. Let's see. Incoming. So the only platform I'm not on that I want to be on is LinkedIn. Now has live streaming built into it, but you have to get an invite. And so I sent in an application. I'm waiting for them to give me an invite to do it. And I need to think do I know anyone at LinkedIn I can ask to push my request forward? Because I think LinkedIn would be a great place for this show, because there's a really big audience there, and they have done a good job notifying people in their mobile app that someone's going live, whether they like it or not. Actually, who do I know at LinkedIn? I know a couple of people. Actually, maybe while you're talking, I'm going to reach out to my LinkedIn friends and ask them how I get some priority in that application process.
Maybe it's good to scale slow first, test it on.
Well, they're owned by Microsoft. They shouldn't have a scaling problem. Just more instances in Azure, right? It's just move the box, and all of a sudden more bandwidth. All right, last minute social media stuff I think has already gone out. Let me just make sure. Yep, social media has already gone out. So excellent. All right. Well, Solomon, how about we just get started?
Okay.
I think we've given ample time for folks to come in.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit record. All right. Oh, real fast before I do this, how do you say your last name?
Berhe.
Berhe?
Uh-huh.
All right. All right. I didn't want to try to figure that out on the fly, so I'm glad I asked. All right.
Okay. So
everything okay? I haven't hit live. I haven't hit record yet.
Yep. Shall I click on screen share?
Nope, not yet. I'll tell you
Okay.
when to do that here in a moment.
Okay.
All right. All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Swift Kick Show. My name is Kevin Griffin. I'm the owner of Swift Kick. We're a software training and consulting company based out of Southeast Virginia, and I am welcomed to have Solomon Berhe with me. How are you today, Solomon?
Very good. Thank you. Yeah.
And you're coming to us from the other side of the world. You're in Stuttgart,
Yes.
Deutschland. Uh,
Yes.
I think it was actually our last show. We had Miss Rachel Appel, and
Mhm.
she's an American, but she's currently based in Berlin.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if it's coincidence or whatnot, but it's kind of fun to talk to people on the other side of the world. Um, but thankfully, it's not too much of a time issue because time zones are silly. So it's 2 o'clock here on the East Coast of the U.S. And I think you said it was getting close to 8 o'clock in the evening
Yep. Yep.
there in Stuttgart. So excellent. So not too late. I I did some talks a couple of years ago where it was a team in India or something like that. I don't remember what it was, and I had to start at seven in the morning their time, and
Mhm.
that ended up being like
Mhm.
one in the morning my time. I don't remember what the time was, but I was late for the first day of the training
Mhm.
because I thought the training was Pacific time on the East Coast, and
Mhm.
it was not. I was way off on my time. No big deal though. Oops,
Mhm.
my video went out. So we're going to go ahead and forego some of our normal Q&A questions on this particular episode. We want to get right into the meat. And Solomon, you're going to talk to us about just
Mhm.
software release forecasting. And I have a good idea what that means,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
I'm hoping in your talk you go a little bit deeper. And
Yep.
folks out there in the audience, if you have any questions at all, just let us know in the chat. I
Yep.
will politely interrupt Solomon whenever he takes a breath or a drink of water to
Yep.
ask your questions. But Solomon, I'm going to give it over to you
Okay.
and go ahead and share your screen and get going.
Yep. Can you see the screen?
It is still loading. I would give it 1 minute. All right, you're good. All set.
It's loading.
It's taking its time, isn't it? There you go.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yep, I sure can.
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you. So today I would like to talk a little bit about forecasting software releases and how did I come with this topic. Um, think about, I'm sure you encountered that you plan the next sprint, you plan the user stories and the scope of the next sprint, and then the next sprint starts. And just on that Monday, a third-party software component makes an update of a software component you depend on, and you need to re-groom your sprint backlog and do the planning from the beginning. Would it help if you were aware that a new version of that component would be released that Monday? That's the trigger for why potentially forecasting software releases might be interesting. Another example is you would like to make a release of a software component that you built yourself. You advertise it, you go live on a Monday, and on the same day, a dependent software component decides to also make an update, a major update, which conflicts with your release, and that's not good. Would it have helped if you were aware that this major update may happen? So this is like maybe two examples why I think there's a potential that forecasting software releases might help some teams in avoiding these kind of risks. Maybe a short introduction about my interest. I entered in 2000 the software domain as a student. Later in 2011, it was early, but I had an idea that the mobile app domain will, from a developer point of view, become more and more relevant. So I decided to look at it and entered that domain, building mobile applications or trying to build mobile applications. It was not easy at the beginning. Then later in 2013, built the first web app, and our team was very annoyed that those continuous software updates very often broke our software development environment. In 2014, this continued when working with native applications, and here it was sometimes even worse because the number of devices in the market were a lot, and testing was therefore difficult. Therefore, a year later, decided to think about how one can address this issue, and started with a MVP, and then today is basically the first presentation on maybe some initial results and just also to get some feedback if this is something worth continuing from the audience point of view. The content of all these slides are to the best of my knowledge, so confident that there are many other views, and I'm looking forward to discuss them. There are 5 items I would like to present. The first one is the evolution, in my view, of the software ecosystem in terms of releases, the risks that were in parallel, and then looking at potential mitigation options and a candidate that tries to implement these mitigations, and then look at these three forecasting initial results and to what extent they're practically helpful. Okay. In my experience, starting in 2000, I noticed that when we started developing, we used JavaScript, or there was no framework. We just used plain JavaScript. And with the years, the number of frameworks or number of software components increased a lot. Initially, it was more on a layer based, so we had more abstraction layers. For instance, in Java, we had suddenly Hibernate and struts and all these frameworks. But also at the tier level, we had then for each tier another software component. And later, we had for tiers and also for layers different component, and it just continues. So what I experience, it seems to continue and continue. So the number of software components is continuing, is increasing. Then the second item is the number of third-party software dependency seems to increase as well. So in my experience, initially, one team or one company or one entity was in charge of building oftentimes an entire software product and each component. Then also later you had these layers and these tiers and also more fragmentation, but it was more or less the same team or company that was working on these components. However, with time, more and more software was outsourced to third-party components that were teams outside your company or yeah. And to date, in my experience, it seems the dependency is increasing such that one component nowadays is developed by so many, or one software product is developed by so many component teams in parallel and with all these dependencies. So this is a second trend. Then the third trend is, one moment, that in my experience, the number of release cycles has increased more and more. So 20 years ago, 20 years ago, we had maybe a more like a waterfall approach where we plan the requirements and implement them, test them, and then when the product is done, it was released to the market. So it was a long-term, more long-term approach. And then slowly, you see that more and more components decided for different reasons. I think one reason is to faster respond to customers, decided to have faster release cycles. In months, many have now a release every month, some every 2 months. And the coordination between these is, I'm not sure to what extent that is done, but the number of the software release cycles has increased in many software components. I see this very much from a mobile developer point of view. Yeah. So what does it mean? If you have more software components, if you have more software component dependencies, and you have faster release cycles, the risk that a software update breaks your product, in my view, is increasing a lot. To illustrate, from the Twitter timeline, just some examples that were posted the last 4 weeks. One person made an update on the phone, and the phone didn't work anymore. And two other examples. So these are examples that a little bit confirm this risk of breaking updates. So in my view, the trend will get worse. So some have the hypothesis that it will get better because of cloud environment where you abstract and you reduce dependencies. I think it will get worse because the whole topic IoT and edge devices, and the more devices you have, the more software you have running on these devices, and the more context you have in which they must interact, etc. And so my hypothesis, it will get worse. So what are potential risk mitigation options? There are probably many, but two candidates are, the first one is very simple, just be aware of a software update that has been already performed. This is sometimes easy, sometimes difficult. If it's a software component that is like a mobile device which has a firmware update, that's not easy to be aware of if you do not have that phone with you. For other components, it's easier, but generally, being aware that there's a software component, a release update, is, I think, one way to reduce the risk. And if you go one step backwards, being able to estimate what releases will be done in the next sprint, in the next month, with a estimation, so it's not for sure, I think will even more reduce the risk for an unexpected software release update. So what's the issue with currently with being aware that there is a software update? It's that the number of release channels is a lot. And to keep track of all the releases is very difficult and time consuming. Difficult because sometimes you do not have access to that information. Like if a smartphone makes a firmware update, you don't have that smartphone. It's difficult to know of that release. And time consuming because potentially you would have to do this task every day. And that's very time consuming. So this is the current challenge with being aware of a software update. With regard to forecasting, currently, this is also to some extent not transparent because it's often on a voluntary basis. So some component teams decide to forecast when there will be a new version. The date will be forecasted, the scope, sometimes not. And the version number, so if it's a major release or minor, that may also be different from component to component. So this is a challenge. And ideally, Initially, it would be good to know the version number to estimate the scope and to what extent it is a breaking release, the date, and the channel, if it's a release candidate out of 10 or if it's a production release that's probably stable. So then what are the two requirements that seem to be needed? First, a platform that allows, and the focus is on easy access to version release updates from different sources, that also generates forecasts and visualizes them in an easy to read way. And towards this goal, I'm working on a platform that tries to address this two requirements. Okay, moment. So there are three, in the next step, there are three examples for how a forecast can look like. The one is, if you look at this is an example of releases that came yesterday. And you can look at the release timeline and then potentially extrapolate the next release date and version. So in this case, you had a downgrade from this version to that version. And if you use this algorithm, it forecasts there's a minor risk that there will be another downgrade. And in this case, it's actually a major downgrade down to 1.3. And knowing this may help your team to estimate what impact does it have on dependent components that your product uses. So not only to estimate how the impact of this downgrade, but also on dependent components. So one way to forecast, and the June is a bug, so the date is a bug. The version is not. One way to forecast a version is basically to look at the timeline and then to make an estimation what the next version and what the next date will be. The next step would be potentially also to look at the channel and potentially also other attributes. Okay, so one way to forecast is basically to extrapolate using previous releases, and the question is, would this help a team to allocate resources for the next sprint or a release if this release or this update takes place? The next one is forecasting option is to look at the aggregate information. So the previous forecasting was looking at the specific component, but if you look at all software components, then what are how do the releases look like during the week? How many releases are done on Monday versus on Tuesday, etc. And if you do that, this is data coming from two databases. One is GitHub, and it's about 1,500 releases. And the other one is the CVE database and from NIST, and yeah, and then it's merged, and then you see the distribution by release channel. Let me go to present.
Solomon, I have a question from the chat if you have a second.
Yep.
So this question is from Joel, and Joel is asking, do library maintainers need to follow some metadata requirements for each release? And how do they get that added to release train?
Currently, the only metadata or the metadata, so there's a GitHub API that provides access to a set of attributes for each tag, release tag. And I'm currently interested only in 5 or 6 attributes. So the version, the channel, the product name, the brand name, the release date, etc. What types of metadata would or do you refer to that could be imported into release train?
You can go and move on. If Joel wants to clarify, he can clarify in chat and we can come back to it.
Yep. And I mean, while this chart is very intuitive, so it's intuitive that on the weekends you have less releases, maybe on the weekdays you have more. To what extent does this help you in terms of deciding when to make a release? So this is a forecast basically for any week, not only for the next week. And it changes, but the trend is probably stable. And to what extent does this information help Scrum teams, product owners, release engineers to determine or decide when are they going to make a software release? That would be something worth looking at. Then the third one I was interested in is in terms of forecasting when in the month, or what's the distribution of releases during the month. And the result is that in the middle of the month, there's a spike of a lot of releases. And at the beginning and at the end, it's more less releases. Here, when asking a friend who has much experience, what is your estimation about this? The estimation was that this data does come from GitHub, but also CVEs. And CVEs also contain commercial software. And the hypothesis was that there's a business cycle, and that companies tend to more release software in the middle of the month because you have more interaction of new customers or leaving customers at the beginning and at the end of the month. It's just a hypothesis. If you have others, I would be very interested. To what extent does this forecast, I mean, this is also valid for the next month, etc., help you determining when in the month to do a software release? Yep, that's it.
Cool. I got a clarification from Joel. So he was asking about when you clicked on an item in release train, it shows some information. That's what he meant by metadata. And in particular, he was asking, is there a particular format for denoting a breaking change in an upcoming version?
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So here, this is a lot about semantics, I think, and when reading about this, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, by definition, a major update is a breaking update. So whenever the first digit changes, then that means it's a breaking update. Currently, it's not visually, you cannot see that here like a warning, look, there is a major update or downgrade. But that's a good suggestion to emphasize that, because that's an important update. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, excellent job, Solomon. Any other questions from the chat? We'll give folks a couple minutes to respond. But that was a really interesting talk. Usually the projects I work on are too small scale for us to worry about anything like that. But I remember it's been a very long time when we used to work on much larger scale applications, and we were targeting a dozen platforms and all that stuff, worrying about releases and or tracking releases and what versions were going to go into what things, and it was a pain in the butt and way above my pay grade, thankfully. Joel has another follow-up question. He wants to know, how do libraries show up on release train?
Exactly. The way they show up is, so the architecture is such that there's a nightly build that downloads any type of a project from GitHub, and then loads it here. Whether it is the software type, whether it is a library or a product, entire product, that's currently not, you cannot see the difference. But currently it's loaded that the most 100 used GitHub projects. So there are a lot of GitHub projects, and for this MVP, the proposal was to start with just a subset out of them.
Excellent. All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap it up there. For Solomon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure having you on. And this is going to get recycled and put up on YouTube for people to watch in the future.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this on any day other than June 26th, then you're watching it in the future. So again, thank you so much for joining us.
Yep.
And everyone out there who watched either on Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook, thanks so much for hanging out with us. And we will see you all next time.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So we have stopped the recording. We are still live, but the official episode's over. Joel's asking some more follow-up questions. So his follow-up question was, most, you were saying something about the most used, and he wants to know by which metric. Did you mean stars?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So excellent. Mike Buckby says, great job. Thanks. So you're getting some praise from the chat.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Joel's chiming in some more. Not a question. He just said he found it interesting that most releases happen in middle of the month. Alrighty. All right, Solomon. Well, I think we're good to go. So you'll see this go live. Well, you'll see it go up on YouTube next week, officially. And you might see your name mentioned in some promotions over the next several months, just as we rebroadcast it. But let me know if you ever want to come back on again. We'll get you back in the queue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for coming on, Solomon. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Bye bye.